The crystalline chambers of the galactic convergence hummed with the collective breath of 1,000 species, their forms casting prismatic shadows across walls that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations for millennia. Today, they bore witness to what they believed was a final accounting. Zethrak's 4 eyes fixed upon the holographic display floating before the assembled council, his chitinous fingers dancing across bioluminescent controls. The arachnoid overseer's mandibles clicked in what his species considered solemn satisfaction as data streams painted their grim picture across the vast amphitheater. Stellar Cycle 847 post-intervention, he announced, his voice carrying through translators to reach every ear, tendril, and sensory organ present. Atmospheric composition: 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, trace gases. Radiation levels: nominal. Biological signatures: 0. A ripple of approval cascaded through the assembled delegates. The massive, core-like vortex shifted their bulk, electromagnetic fields pulsing with contentment. The Terran problem has been resolved. They intoned through harmonic vibrations that made the chamber walls sing. The aggressive expansion of Homo sapiens has been permanently curtailed. In the observation gallery reserved for newer member species, Quilendra of the Lysithian Confederation watched with growing unease. Her silver-scaled form trembled almost imperceptibly as she processed the clinical nature of the discussion. The Lysithians had only joined the convergence 3 centuries ago, and their integration had been peaceful, a stark contrast to what she was witnessing described. "Let the record show," continued Zethrak, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "that humanity is officially classified as extinct. The species designated Homo sapiens, originating from the 3rd planet of the Sol system, has been eliminated from galactic civilization. Their aggressive territorial expansion, their refusal to submit to convergent authority, and their alarming rate of technological advancement pose an unacceptable threat to galactic stability." The great viewing sphere at the chamber center shifted to display Earth as it appeared now, a blue marble hanging in space, its continents visible beneath swirling white clouds. Beautiful, serene, and apparently lifeless. The images showed no cities, no lights on the night side, no orbital infrastructure. The planet that had once bristled with the chaotic energy of 8 billion humans now turned silently in its orbit, a monument to the convergence's decisive action. Malix, the ancient ethereal who served as the Council's historical advisor, floated forward in their containment field. Their form was barely visible, more suggestion than substance, but their presence commanded attention from beings who measured their lifespans in geological epochs. "This marks the 47 species eliminated under Protocol Omega," they whispered, their voice like wind through stellar debris. "Each time, we have acted to preserve the greater harmony of our civilization. The humans, like the Vectri before them and the Namaran before them, chose expansion over integration, conquest over cooperation." Young Quilendra's translator struggled with the emotional undertones in her native Lysithian as she spoke into her personal recording device. "They speak of harmony, but what I witnessed feels like orchestrated silence. The humans were given no chance to adapt, no opportunity to prove their value to the galactic community. They were judged dangerous for their rapid growth, their creativity, their unwillingness to accept limitations that other species had embraced for millennia." Zethrak's attention turned toward the observation gallery, his compound eyes reflecting the chamber's bioluminescent lighting. Observer Quilendra raises concerns that have been noted and dismissed by this council. The human species demonstrated clear indicators of future aggression, rapid technological advancement, unified planetary government achieved through conflict, successful colonization of their system's 4th planet, and preliminary faster-than-light experiments. They were a cascading threat to galactic stability. The evidence had been overwhelming, compiled over decades of careful observation. Humanity's first tentative steps into their local space had been met with wonder by some convergence members, but the intelligence reports painted a different picture. Humans fought each other with devastating efficiency, turned their own planet's climate into a weapon, and showed no signs of natural population controls that kept other species in check. When they had achieved fusion power, the convergence had made its decision. Vortex electromagnetic field pulsed with finality. The bombardment fleet reports complete success. Targeted electromagnetic pulses eliminated all technological infrastructure. Subsequent kinetic strikes eliminated all major population centers. The planet's ecosystem remains intact, available for future colonization by more suitable species when the radiation clears. What none of the assembled council members could see was the faintest of energy signatures, buried deep beneath Earth's polar ice caps. Ancient geothermal vents powered systems that had gone dark the moment the first convergent scout ships had entered the outer system. Miles beneath the surface, in caverns that had been prepared with desperate haste, 10,000 humans waited in cryogenic suspension while automated systems maintained their vigil. They had known the attack was coming. Dr. Kalen Reeves had seen the preliminary scanning runs, had detected the gravitational anomalies that suggested massive fleets gathering just beyond Neptune's orbit. In the 72 hours between detection and impact, humanity had made an impossible choice. Sacrifice the many to save the few, and begin planning for a return that would shake the galaxy to its foundations. Zethrak closed the session with ceremonial finality. Let this serve as a reminder to all species within our sphere of influence. The convergence maintains peace through strength, harmony through order. Those who would disrupt the natural balance face the same fate as Terra. As the council members dispersed to their various domains across the galaxy, none noticed the small probe that had been silently recording everything from its position disguised among the chamber's decorative elements. Its databanks full. It began the long journey toward a seemingly dead planet, where patient machines waited for the signal to begin humanity's resurrection. Earth had fallen silent, but it was not sleeping. It was dreaming of revenge. The red emergency lighting cast everything in the deep Cheyenne facility in bloody shadows as Dr. Kalen Reeves stood before the largest holographic display humanity had ever constructed. Around him, the greatest minds on Earth worked with desperate efficiency, their faces illuminated by screens showing trajectories, population centers, and countdown timers that seemed to tick away the remaining moments of human civilization. Gravitational distortions confirmed in the Kuiper Belt, reported Nix Voss. Her fingers fly across quantum processors that had been humanity's proudest achievement just 72 hours ago. Now they felt like toys compared to the massive forms appearing on their sensors. Fleet composition analysis suggests, Jesus, Kalen, I'm reading energy signatures comparable to small stars. Dr. Theramalik looked up from his workstation, his dark eyes reflecting the terrible mathematics he'd been running. Population dispersal models are complete. We can maybe save 12,000 in the deep shelters, 15 if we push the life support systems beyond safety margins. He paused, his voice cracking slightly. That's from 8 billion, Kalen. The weight of the decision pressed down on Reeves like the mass of the planet above them. As Earth's chief defense coordinator, he had spent decades preparing for threats from space, but nothing in their wildest scenarios had prepared them for this. The Convergence fleet wasn't coming to invade or occupy. Their scans showed them positioning for complete sterilization. Show me the deep cave systems again, Reeves ordered, though he had memorized every detail hours ago. The holographic display shifted to show the carefully selected locations: abandoned mine shafts in northern Canada, natural caverns in Siberia, volcanic tubes in Iceland that connected to massive underground chambers. Each location had been hastily retrofitted with fusion reactors, hydroponics bays, and cryogenic systems that could sustain a small population for decades. Lyra Chun, the youngest person in the room at 28, had been running psychological profiles all day. The probability of maintaining group cohesion during extended hibernation is less than 40%, she reported, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. We're asking people to sleep through the death of everyone they've ever known and wake up to a universe that thinks they're extinct. They'll wake up angry, said Nix, pulling up files on humanity's most recent technological breakthroughs. We've been developing these weapon systems for years, thinking we might face a conventional alien invasion, kinetic bombardment platforms, antimatter warheads, quantum disruption devices. It's all theoretical, but the mathematics are sound. Theron's workstation chimed with an incoming transmission from the orbital monitoring stations. First wave incoming. EMP burst designed to knock out our technology without damaging the biosphere. They want the planet intact. His hands paused over his controls. Kalen, we have maybe 6 hours before everything goes dark. The plan had taken shape with impossible speed. Select candidates were already in transit to the deep shelters: scientists, engineers, military specialists, and enough genetic diversity to rebuild the species. Each person had been given a choice, and the psychological profiles of those who accepted painted a clear picture. They were not people who would quietly accept extinction. Project Lazarus is uploading to the deep storage systems, reported Darian Okafor from his position at the Central Command Cluster. Complete technological databases, manufacturing specifications, resource location data, and... He hesitated. Complete intelligence files on every convergent species we've been able to identify. Reeves nodded grimly. During their brief contact with galactic civilization, humanity had been characteristically thorough in gathering intelligence. They had learned about convergence military capabilities, economic systems, political structures, and most importantly, their weaknesses. Every species that had been eliminated under Protocol Omega had been caught off guard, unprepared for the scale of the response. Humanity would not make that mistake. The anger protocols are in place, added Lyra, referring to the psychological conditioning programs that would be administered during cryogenic sleep. When they wake up, they'll remember everything. Every city that burns, every person who dies, every broken promise of peaceful coexistence. The grief will become fuel. Outside the facility, automated systems were already beginning the largest cover-up in human history. Orbital debris was being carefully positioned to explain the loss of communications. Surface installations were rigged with charges that would simulate the effects of alien bombardment. Most ingeniously, biological samples were being distributed in patterns that would suggest a desperate but failed evacuation attempt. First pulse in 30 minutes, announced Nix as her sensors detected energy buildup in the approaching fleet. All shelter facilities report ready status. Cryogenic systems are online and stable. Theron looked up from his final calculations. The hibernation cycles are programmed for 50-year intervals, with 10% awakening from maintenance cycles. Assuming standard convergence monitoring protocols, we estimate 40 to 60 years before they consider the planet safe for their own use. 40 to 60 years, Reeves repeated, imagining the small group of humans who would wake up to that timeline. They'll inherit a universe that considers their species extinct and complete technological specifications for weapons that could crack planets. The first electromagnetic pulse lit up the night sky above them, a beautiful aurora that marked the beginning of humanity's apparent end. Across the globe, cities went dark as power grids failed and electronics died. The few humans still on the surface looked up at the lights in the sky with wonder and terror, not knowing that their species was already beginning its long sleep. Cryogenic systems engaging, reported Darian as the facility around them hummed with the sound of freezing chambers coming online. 10,047 souls entering hibernation. Reeves was among the last to enter the cryogenic chambers, and as the cold embrace of artificial sleep took hold, his final thought was not of the world dying above him, but the one that would be reborn from its ashes. Humanity had always been at its most dangerous when cornered, and the convergence had just backed an entire species into the deepest corner imaginable. Above them, the bombardment continued through the night, turning Earth's great cities into monuments to the convergence's power. But deep below, in chambers carved from stone and fury, humanity dreamed of fire and waited for their turn to light up the stars. 53 years after the first electromagnetic pulse painted Earth's sky in artificial aurora, Isar Volkov's eyes opened to absolute darkness. The cryogenic suspension chamber that had been her world for over 5 decades hissed open with mechanical precision, releasing her into air that tasted of recycled atmosphere and barely contained rage. The awakening protocols were designed to be gentle, but nothing could soften the psychological impact of remembering humanity's death. As consciousness fully returned, so did the memories. Her daughter's face pressed against the transport window as they separated families for the selection process. The sight of Moscow burning on emergency broadcasts. The terrible mathematics of survival that had condemned billions to die while a chosen few slept. "Status report," she whispered, her voice cracking from decades of disuse. The chamber's medical systems responded with data streams that painted themselves across her retinas through neural interfaces that had been implanted before hibernation. Heart rate elevated but stable. Muscle atrophy minimal thanks to automated stimulation systems. Psychological profiles. The readings made her smile grimly. Anger levels were off the charts, just as intended. Around her, other chambers were beginning their awakening sequences. Of the 10,047 humans who had entered the deep sleep, 9,812 were successfully revived. The losses were acceptable, even expected, but each empty chamber represented not just a death, but a reduction in their already impossibly small population. Commander Darian Okafor emerged from his chamber, looking like he had aged decades in sleep. Though Isar knew the effect was psychological rather than physical. The hibernation systems had kept their bodies in perfect stasis, but their minds had been active, processing the grief and trauma through carefully designed dream sequences that transformed sorrow into focused determination. "Primary system status," he called out, his command voice echoing to the vast cavern that housed their survival chamber. The response came from dozens of stations as people took their positions with the muscle memory of extensive pre-hibernation training. Fusion reactors operating at 97% efficiency, reported someone from the power distribution center. Backup systems fully operational. Hydroponics bays show signs of automated maintenance issues, but food production capability is intact. Manufacturing systems require calibration, but all primary equipment survived hibernation protocols. Isar made her way to the Central Command Center, where the massive holographic displays that had showed Earth's death 50 years ago now painted a picture of its resurrection. The planet above them was exactly as the Convergence had left it, apparently barren, monitored by automated systems, and occasionally visited by survey teams who found exactly what they expected to find. Nothing. Convergence activity reports, she requested, settling into the intelligence coordination station that had been her assignment. The data that flowed through her neural interfaces told a story of galactic complacency. Earth was listed in official records as sterilized, safe for colonization, pending radiation clearance. Survey visits had decreased in frequency as the decades passed, and the most recent monitoring sweep had been over 8 months ago. The Convergence had moved on to other threats, other worlds that required their attention. They had forgotten about humanity with the casual dismissal of a gardener who had eliminated a patch of weeds. This, more than anything else, fueled the cold rage that now burned in every human chest. Manufacturing priorities, announced Theron Malik, who had awakened to find himself the oldest living human at 78. His mind, however, was as sharp as it had been in the last desperate hours before hibernation. Primary construction queue includes orbital fabrication platforms, quantum communication arrays, and weapon systems that didn't exist when we went to sleep. The plans they had developed in humanity's final days had been theoretical, limited by the technology and resources available in 72 hours of desperate preparation. Now, with 5 decades of automated research and development guided by artificial intelligence systems, those theories had become blueprints for weapons that could reshape the galactic balance of power. Lyra Chun, now the expedition's chief psychological officer, reviewed the mental state reports with professional satisfaction. "Anger levels are optimal," she announced. "The conditioning protocols worked exactly as designed. Everyone remembers everything, and nobody has forgiven anything." The psychological preparation had been crucial to their survival plan. A normal human population might have emerged from hibernation seeking to rebuild their lives, to find a place in the galaxy that had rejected them. But these humans have been specifically selected and conditioned for one purpose: to make the Convergence regret their casual genocide. Weapons development status, called out Nix Voss, taking her position at the technological development station. The artificial intelligence systems had been busy during their sleep, following research protocols that pushed the boundaries of human engineering into territory that would have seemed impossible just decades ago. Antimatter production facilities are operational. Quantum disruption technology has moved from theoretical to practical. And she paused, reviewing data that made her smile with predatory satisfaction. "We've successfully weaponized the zero-point energy research that the Convergence thought was beyond us." Commander Okafor reviewed the strategic situation with the cold calculation of someone who had spent 50 years dreaming of war. Population centers across the galaxy have expanded significantly during our absence. The Convergence has grown comfortable, confident in their dominance. Their military forces are distributed across thousands of systems, maintaining order among species that have accepted their place in the galactic hierarchy. Distribution patterns suggest vulnerability, added Isara, cross-referencing intelligence data with current observations. They become an empire of maintenance rather than conquest. Their fleets are designed to suppress rebellion, not fight a technologically advanced opponent. The irony was bitter and perfect. The Convergence had eliminated humanity specifically because of their rapid technological advancement and aggressive expansion. Now, after 50 years of directed research guided by artificial intelligence systems and the focused hatred of survivors, humanity had developed weapons technology that far exceeded anything in the Convergence arsenal. Timeline for surface operations? Asked Okafor. 6 months for primary construction. Theron replied. 12 months for full orbital infrastructure. 18 months for the first wave of kinetic bombardment platforms. They had time, but time was also their enemy. Every day they remained hidden was another day the Convergence could discover their survival. Another day their small population could suffer losses they could not afford. The balance between preparation and action was precarious, but they had decades of planning to guide them. Primary objective remains unchanged. Okafor announced to the assembled humans, "The Convergence declared us extinct. We're going to make them wish we actually were." As the survivors settled into their roles in humanity's resurrection, automatic systems throughout the facility began implementing the next phase of their awakening. Manufacturing systems that had been dormant for decades hummed to life, beginning the production of materials that would soon carry death across the stars. Above them, Earth continued its silent orbit, giving no sign of the fury being born in its depths. The Convergence continued their comfortable dominance of the galaxy, unaware that the species they had casually exterminated was about to return with weapons that could burn the stars themselves. The Lysithian survey vessel Wandering Harmony drifted through Earth's outer atmosphere with the casual confidence of a species that had never learned to fear the dead. Observer Quilendra, now bearing the rank insignia of a full cultural assessment specialist, guided her ship through its routine monitoring sweep with practiced efficiency, her silver-scaled hands dancing across bioneural interfaces that responded to her thoughts as much as her touch. It had been 55 years since the Convergence's declaration of humanity's extinction, and Quilendra had requested this assignment specifically. The memory of that day in the crystalline chambers still haunted her dreams. The clinical precision with which an entire species had been dismissed from existence, the terrible certainty in Zethrak's multifaceted eyes as he announced their successful elimination. Atmospheric composition remained stable, reported her ship's artificial intelligence, its voice carrying the melodic harmonics that Lysithian technology favored. Oxygen levels consistent with pre-bombardment readings. No detectable biological signatures above bacterial level, but something was wrong. Quilendra's species had evolved from apex predators on a world where survival depended on detecting the subtle signs of prey and predator alike. Their neural architecture was uniquely suited to pattern recognition, and as she reviewed the data streams flowing through her consciousness, patterns were emerging that should not exist. Archive comparative analysis, she commanded, pulling up records from the previous 54 years of monitoring sweeps. Focus on electromagnetic signatures, gravitational anomalies, and trace element distribution. The data painted itself across her perception in layers of probability matrices and temporal correlations. On the surface, everything appeared exactly as expected from a world recovering from systematic bombardment. The radiation levels had decreased according to projected models. Plant life was slowly returning to the devastated continents. Ocean chemistry was stabilizing. But buried in the quantum static of natural electromagnetic background noise were patterns too regular to be random, too subtle to be detected by standard monitoring protocols. The gravitational field showed micro-fluctuations that suggested mass distribution inconsistent with a completely dead world. Most disturbing, trace element analysis revealed isotopic signatures that indicated active fusion reactions somewhere beneath the planet's surface. Historical query, Quilendra whispered, her translator struggling with the emotional undertones of growing alarm. What was a human assessment of Convergence first contact protocols? The archives painted a picture that made her respiratory system seize with dread. Humanity had been monitored for decades before first contact, Their development tracked with the same clinical precision that preceded every Protocol Omega implementation. But unlike other species, humans had demonstrated an unusual talent for deception and misdirection in their own internal conflicts. They had developed elaborate false flag operations, hidden military installations, and camouflage technologies that fooled even their own kind. Computer probability assessment. Could human survival capabilities have exceeded convergence estimates? The AI's response carried harmonic frequencies that indicated high confidence in its calculations. Analysis of human technological development suggests advanced underground construction capabilities. Geothermal energy exploitation was an established technology. Probability of successful deep shelter survival, 47%. Quilender's chromatic scales shifted to patterns of alarm and uncertainty. If humans had survived, if they had been developing technology in isolation for over 5 decades, the implications were staggering. The species that had been eliminated specifically for their rapid advancement and aggressive expansion would have had unlimited time to focus their efforts on a single goal: revenge. Initiate deep scanning protocols, she ordered, engaging sensor systems that had been designed to detect weapons capabilities on hostile worlds. Full spectrum analysis, maximum penetration depth. What the scanners revealed made Quilender question everything she thought she knew about the universe. Deep beneath Earth's polar ice caps, in locations that showed no evidence of human habitation from orbital surveys, the sensors detected massive artificial structures, fusion reactors operating at efficiency levels that exceeded convergence engineering, manufacturing facilities producing materials with molecular compositions that appeared in no known database, and most terrifying of all, energy signatures that suggested weapons research far beyond anything in the galactic arsenal. Immediate priority transmission to Convergence Command, she ordered, but her ship's communication systems suddenly registered massive interference. The quantum channels that connected all Convergence vessels to their command structure were being systematically blocked by a signal so sophisticated it could only have been generated by a civilization with technology rivaling their own. On her tactical display, new contacts were appearing with alarming speed. Not ships. The signatures were wrong for conventional vessels. These objects were rising from Earth's surface with acceleration curves that suggested propulsion systems based on principles of convergence had not yet mastered. They moved like projectiles but maneuvered like guided weapons, and they were heading directly for her position. Evasive protocols, Quilender commanded, but her ship's responses seemed sluggish compared to the approaching objects. The first wave passed harmlessly by her vessel, but as they continued their trajectory toward the outer system, her sensors revealed their true purpose. Each object contained enough antimatter to sterilize a small moon, and they were heading for the Convergence monitoring stations that maintained oversight of the supposedly dead system. The explosions lit up space with a brief fury of artificial stars. One by one, the monitoring stations that had watched Earth for half a century died in nuclear fire. Their death screams transmitted across quantum channels before the communication network itself began to fail. Humanity was cutting the Convergence's eyes and ears from the Sol system with surgical precision. Warning. Multiple contact signatures emerging from planetary surface. Announce her ship's AI, its harmonic frequencies shifting to patterns of near panic. Detection indicates orbital bombardment platforms of unknown configuration. Quilendra watched in fascination and horror as Earth's apparent death mask fell away. The planet that seemed empty and broken for 55 years suddenly bristled with weapons platforms that rose from hidden positions beneath the surface. Kinetic bombardment systems that could crack continents. Energy weapons that bent spacetime itself. And rising above them all, a single ship unlike anything in her species' databases. The vessel was clearly of human construction, but its technology appeared to have advanced decades beyond what they had possessed at the time of their supposed extinction. Its hull shimmered with quantum displacement fields that made targeting impossible. Its weapon systems showed energy readings that suggested it could engage Convergence battleships on equal terms. And from its communication arrays came a transmission in perfect galactic standard. This is Commodore Kalen Reeves of the Earth Reclamation Fleet. The voice carried the cold authority of someone who had spent decades planning for this moment. You are trespassing in human territory. Withdraw immediately or share the fate of your monitoring stations. Quilendra's ship was alone, surrounded by weapons that could destroy her in seconds, facing the impossible reality that humanity had not only survived their own extinction, but had used that time to become something far more dangerous than Convergence had ever imagined. Her options were limited to compliance or death, and her species' survival instincts were finely calibrated. This is Cultural Assessment Specialist Quilendra of the Lysithian Confederation. She transmitted back, I surrender my vessel and request safe passage to inform Convergence of your survival. The response came with a sound that took her translator several seconds to identify. Human laughter, cold and sharp as the space between stars. "Oh, Quilendra," came Reeves' voice. "The Convergence is going to find out about our survival very soon. But thank you for volunteering to deliver the message personally." The war room deep beneath Antarctica's ice had been carved from solid rock with mining equipment that predated human civilization, then enhanced with technology that would not be invented by the galaxy's other species for centuries to come. Commodore Kalen Reeves stood before a holographic display that showed the entire galaxy in three-dimensional relief, each star system color-coded according to threat assessment, strategic value, and projected casualties. Around him, the surviving leadership of humanity planned the most audacious military campaign in galactic history. 9,812 humans against a Convergence that numbered in the trillions, spread across thousands of worlds, backed by technologies that had maintained galactic dominance for millennia. On paper, it was impossible. In practice, it was humanity's only chance at justice. "Intelligence assessment complete," reported Director Isar Volkov, her neural interface flickering with data streams that painted probability matrices across her consciousness. 55 years of isolation have given us significant advantages. The Convergence has grown complacent, their military doctrine focused on suppressing rebellion rather than fighting peer opponents. The captured Lysithian observer sat in a containment field at the edge of the room, her chromatic scales shifting between patterns of fear and fascination as she witnessed humanity's resurrection. Quilendra had been cooperative, even helpful, once she understood the scope of what she was observing. Her species had joined the Convergence willingly, but their integration had been peaceful. They had never seen what happened to civilizations that chose resistance. Fleet composition analysis, called out Fleet Admiral Nix Voss, her hands dancing across quantum processors that controlled humanity's growing armada. Primary targets have been identified across 17 star systems. Key objectives include Convergence command centers, major shipyards, and communication hubs. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its scope. Humanity could not match the Convergence in numbers, but they had spent 55 years developing weapons technology that made numbers irrelevant. Single ships that could engage entire fleets, bombardment systems that could crack planets from stellar distances, and most importantly, weapons that could target the quantum communication networks that held the Convergence's vast empire together. Psychological warfare protocols are in place, added Dr. Lyrichin, reviewing data that showed the careful psychological conditioning that had shaped humanity's survivors. The first wave will be designed for maximum terror impact. We want the galaxy to know that humanity has returned, and we want them to fear what that means. Theron Malik, now bearing the rank of Chief Technology Officer despite his advanced age, gestured toward displays showing weapon systems that would have been pure fantasy just decades ago. Zero-point energy manipulation is now fully operational. Quantum disruption technology has exceeded all theoretical projections, and the antimatter production facilities are operating at 700% of original capacity estimates. The technology that would soon rain death across the galaxy had been developed in artificial intelligence research centers that never slept, guided by human creativity and alien desperation. The survivors had not just maintained their scientific edge during hibernation, they had exponentially expanded it, creating weapons that existed in theoretical frameworks the Convergence had never even considered. "Primary target selection," announced Reeves, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades preparing for this moment. "First wave will hit the Arachnoid Overseer installation in the Kepler 442 system. Zethrak himself will witness the return of the species he declared extinct. The symbolism was important, but so was the strategic value. The Kepler 442 system contained the primary manufacturing facilities for Convergence monitoring equipment, the same technology that had been used to observe humanity's final days. Its destruction would blind the convergence across dozens of systems, while delivering an unmistakable message about human intentions. Temporal coordination requirements, reported Commander Darian Okafor, reviewing logistics that span interstellar distances. Synchronized strikes across multiple systems require quantum communication arrays that exceed current convergence technology. Estimated preparation time, 3 weeks. 3 weeks to launch a war that would reshape galactic civilization. The survivors worked with the desperate efficiency of people who knew they would never get a second chance. Every minute spent in preparation was a minute the convergence could discover their survival, could mobilize forces that might overwhelm even humanity's technological advantages. Casualties estimates, requested Reeves, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Lyra's psychological profile data painted a grim picture. Convergence leadership shows no capacity for surrender or negotiation. They view themselves as the natural rulers of the galaxy, and any challenge to that authority represents an existential threat to their worldview. Military casualties will be total. Civilian casualties. She paused, reviewing data that made even hardened soldiers uncomfortable, will depend on how quickly their military surrenders. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. Humanity's return would not be a negotiation or a demand for justice. It would be a war of extermination, fought with weapons that could sterilize star systems and conducted by a species that had spent 55 years learning to hate with perfect efficiency. Quilendra's translator struggled with harmonic frequencies that conveyed desperate urgency. "Please," she said, her scales shifting to patterns that indicated submissive terror. "The convergence will surrender if they understand your capabilities. Many species join willingly, not through conquest. We can prevent unnecessary bloodshed." Reeves turned toward the captive observer with eyes that had seen the death of 8 billion humans. "Quilendra, your people were lucky. You were allowed to join because you posed no threat, demonstrated no ambition beyond your own system. Humanity was eliminated because we refused to accept limitations, because we grew too quickly and reached too far." He gestured toward the holographic display, showing the galaxy's power structure. The convergence doesn't negotiate with threats. They eliminate them. The only language they understand is superior firepower, and we're about to give them a comprehensive lesson in human linguistics. The final preparations moved forward with mechanical precision. Weapons were loaded, coordinates verified, communication arrays synchronized. Across Earth's hidden facilities, the machinery of war hummed with anticipation. Soon, the galaxy would learn that humanity's obituary had been written prematurely. As the last systems came online, Reeves looked around the war room at the faces of humanity's survivors. Each person represented millions of the dead, billions of lives that would never be lived, dreams that had died in nuclear fire 55 years ago. Their small numbers were not a weakness. They were a concentration of pure human determination distilled into its most dangerous form. "Final weapons check in 72 hours, he announced. "All personnel prepare for immediate departure to combat stations." The war for humanity's soul was about to begin, and the galaxy would burn before it was over. Part 6, The First Strike. The arachnoid manufacturing complex orbiting Kepler 442 had operated without interruption for over 3 centuries, its biomechanical infrastructure growing like a living coral reef through the vacuum of space. Zethrak himself had overseen its construction in his younger years, when the convergence was still actively expanding rather than simply maintaining their galactic dominance. Now, as he reviewed production reports in his crystalline command chamber, the facility represented the pinnacle of his species' engineering achievement. The monitoring arrays being constructed here would soon be deployed to watch over a dozen newly pacified systems, ensuring that no emerging civilization could pose a threat to galactic stability. It was routine work, the kind of systematic oversight that had maintained peace across the galaxy for millennia. The last thing on Zethrak's mind was a small, blue world where humanity had supposedly died 55 years ago. His 4 compound eyes were focused on efficiency reports when the quantum communication networks began failing. Not disrupted, destroyed, with surgical precision that suggested technology far beyond any known resistance movement. One by one, Monitoring stations across a dozen star systems went silent, their death screams transmitted in microsecond bursts before the communication grid itself began to collapse. "Alert status maximum," Zethrak commanded, his mandibles clicking with the rhythm of growing alarm. "Contact the Convergence Command. Report coordinated attack on surveillance infrastructure." But the communication channels were already gone, severed by weapons that existed only in theoretical frameworks. The manufacturing complex was alone, isolated in space with no way to call for help and no understanding of what they faced. That's when the sensors detected impossible signatures emerging from a quantum foam between dimensions. Not ships traveling through hyperspace. These objects were materializing directly from folded space-time, appearing in formation around the manufacturing complex with precision that suggested technology centuries beyond Convergence capabilities. The vessels were unmistakably human in design, but their configuration bore no resemblance to the primitive ships Earth had possessed before bombardment. These craft moved like living things, their hulls shifting and flowing as they adjusted to local gravitational fields. Their weapon signatures defied analysis, showing energy readings that suggested they could manipulate the fundamental forces of physics. "This is impossible," whispered Zethrak's primary assistant, a young arachnoid whose carapace still bore the blue-green patterns of youth. The humans were eliminated. Complete biological sterilization was confirmed, but the evidence before them suggested otherwise. The lead vessel, massive as a Convergence battleship, but infinitely more graceful, open communication channels using protocols that should have been beyond human knowledge. The voice that emerged carried the cold authority of absolute certainty. Zethrak of the Arachnoid Oversight Council. The transmission began, translated into harmonic frequencies that arachnoid sensory organs could process. "This is Commodore Kalen Reeves of the Earth Reclamation Fleet. 55 years ago, you declared my species extinct. Today, we return that favor." The manufacturing complex's defensive systems activated automatically, biomechanical weapon arrays that had been designed to repel conventional attacks from rebellious civilizations. Energy beams lanced through space toward the human vessels, but the attacks passed harmlessly through hulls that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. The humans had weaponized dimensional manipulation, turning their ships into ghosts that could strike without being touched. "Defensive protocols ineffective," reported the tactical station, its organic neural networks struggling to process sensor data that defied conventional physics. "Enemy vessels show quantum displacement characteristics. Weapons cannot achieve target lock." Zethrak watched with growing horror as humanity demonstrated the technological advancement that had originally marked them for elimination. But where their early progress had been rapid, their development during isolation had been exponential. These were not the crude, aggressive primates of Convergence had feared. They had become something far more dangerous. "Open all communication channels," Zethrak commanded. "Attempt negotiation." The response came with sounds that his translator identified as human laughter, cold, sharp, and utterly without mercy. "Negotiation?" Reeves' voice carried the weight of 55 years of concentrated hatred. "Zethrak, when humanity sought peaceful contact with galactic civilization, we were systematically eliminated. When we offered to accept limitations on our expansion, we were bombarded from orbit. When 8 billion of my people burned in nuclear fire, where was the Convergence's interest in negotiation?" The first human weapons fired, and Zethrak's understanding of physics collapsed. Instead of energy beams or projectiles, the attackers deployed what could only be described as weaponized space-time. Reality itself bent and twisted around the manufacturing complex, gravitational fields fluctuating with impossible precision. Entire sections of the facility began folding in on themselves, compressed into quantum singularities that winked out of existence with brief flashes of exotic radiation. "They're not destroying us," realized the tactical officer, his voice carrying harmonic frequencies of pure terror. "They're deleting us from reality." More human vessels were appearing, materializing from quantum space with the casual confidence of a species that had mastered technologies the Convergence had thought impossible. They moved through the manufacturing complex like predators through a flock of prey, their weapons selectively targeting specific systems with surgical precision. The biomechanical manufacturing arrays that had taken centuries to grow died in seconds, their organic components aging millennia in moments as the humans demonstrated time manipulation capabilities. The communication hubs that coordinated production across dozens of systems imploded into quantum foam. Most disturbing of all, the humans were deliberately leaving some sections intact. They wanted survivors to witness and report what they had seen. "Emergency data burst to all convergence facilities," Zethrak ordered, his voice carrying the desperate authority of someone who knew he was about to die. Species classification error. Humanity not extinct. Technological advancement exponential. Extreme danger to galactic stability. But the message would never reach its destination. The human ships had deployed some kind of information warfare system that corrupted quantum communication networks at the fundamental level. Any attempt to transmit data about their capabilities resulted in cascading system failures that spread across communication grids like a virus. The final phase of the attack demonstrated humanity's understanding of psychological warfare. Instead of simply destroying the manufacturing complex, they began to transform it. The biomechanical structures were infected with nanoscale devices that rewrote their genetic programming, turning the facility into a monument to human technological superiority. Organic walls began displaying images of Earth before bombardment. Cities full of life, space elevators reaching toward the stars, the faces of 8 billion people who had died for crime of growing too quickly. Zethrak, Kame Reeves' voice one final time. "Your people declared us extinct because we refused to accept the limitations you impose on our growth. 55 years of isolation taught us that limitations are simply problems to be solved. Today, we demonstrate the solution." The human fleet began to withdraw, their ships fading back into quantum space as mysteriously as they had arrived. But the manufacturing complex remained, transformed into a broadcasting station that would transmit humanity's message across every frequency the convergence could detect. The images of the dead, the technical specifications of weapons that violated known physics, and most terrifying of all, coordinates for 17 more target systems where similar demonstrations would occur simultaneously. Zethrak floated in his damaged command chamber, surrounded by the twisted remains of his life's work, watching as humanity announced their return to a galaxy that had thought them safely extinct. The species that had been eliminated for their dangerous potential had returned with capabilities that made the convergence's worst fears seem optimistic by comparison. As emergency systems struggled to maintain life support in the dying facility, Zethrak finally understood the terrible miscalculation his people had made. They had eliminated humanity not because they were dangerous, but because they might become dangerous. In trying to prevent that future, they had created something far worse, a species with unlimited time, unlimited motivation, and unlimited hatred focused on a single goal. The war for galactic dominance had begun, and humanity was no longer interested in finding their place in the existing order. They had returned to impose their own. The crystalline chambers of the galactic convergence, which had witnessed humanity's death sentence 55 years earlier, now echoed with the harmonic frequencies of species-wide panic. Representatives from across the galaxy arrived in streams of desperate faster-than-light travel, their various forms creating a cacophony of alarm that the translation system struggled to process. Vorthack's massive core-like form dominated the emergency session, electromagnetic fields pulsing with patterns that conveyed systematic terror. 17 star systems simultaneously attacked, they reported, their harmonic vibrations making the chamber walls sing with dread. Manufacturing centers destroyed, communication networks corrupted, defensive fleets eliminated without effective resistance. The holographic displays that surrounded the assembled council showed scenes that defied their understanding of warfare. Human vessels appearing from quantum space without warning, deploying weapons that seemed to rewrite the laws of physics, striking with precision that suggested intelligence capabilities far beyond what any civilization should possess. Malix, the ancient ethereal advisor, floated in a containment field with energy patterns that suggested profound disturbance. The theoretical frameworks are consistent with their pre-bombardment technological trajectory, they whispered, their voice like stellar wind through cosmic debris. 55 years of isolated development, focused entirely on military applications, guided by artificial intelligence systems operating at capacities that exceed our modeling capabilities. From her position in the observer's gallery, Quilendra watched the proceedings with the perspective of someone who had witnessed humanity's resurrection firsthand. Her chromatic scales shifted to patterns that her translator couldn't adequately convey, a mixture of awe, terror, and something approaching admiration for the species that had accomplished the impossible. "Request permission to address the council," she transmitted, her voice carrying harmonic frequencies that cut through the chaos of panicked discussions. Zethrak, present despite the destruction of his manufacturing complex, gestured for attention with manipulator arms that still bore scorch marks from human weapons. Observer Quilendra was present during initial contact with the surviving humans. Her testimony may provide insight into their capabilities and intentions. The chamber fell silent as Quilendra took the central position, her silver scale form reflecting the chamber's bioluminescent lighting. "Honor representatives," she began. "I have observed humanity's resurrection, and I can confirm that they possess technology that exceeds our current understanding. But more importantly, I have witnessed their psychological state." She activated her personal recording systems, projecting her memories of the conversation with Commodore Reeves onto the chamber's displays. The cold authority in his voice, the systematic nature of their planning, the casual dismissal of negotiation, all of it painted a picture of a species that had transformed their grief into weapons-grade determination. "They are not seeking territory or resources," Quilendra continued, her scales shifting to patterns of profound unease. "They are seeking justice, as they define it. 55 years of isolation have allowed them to process their trauma in ways that have made them utterly focused on a single objective, making the convergence pay for their genocide." The implications settled over the assembled representatives like a cloud of toxic gas. They were not facing a conventional rebellion or territorial dispute. They were confronting a species that had used the time since their supposed extinction to become something unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization with technology superior to convergence and absolutely no interest in peaceful coexistence. "Military assessment," demanded Vorthak, their electromagnetic fields fluctuating with frequencies that indicated desperate hope for conventional solutions. The report came from Fleet Marshal Corvain, a member of the warrior Nexri species, whose people had served as the Convergence's primary military force for centuries. Human vessels demonstrate quantum displacement capabilities that make them effectively immune to conventional weapons. Their own armament appear to manipulate fundamental forces, gravity, time, matter-energy conversion, in ways that our physics cannot explain. He gestured toward tactical displays, showing the aftermath of humanity's coordinated strikes. Casualties are total wherever they choose to engage. No convergence vessel has successfully damaged a human ship. No defensive system has proven effective against their weapons. And their information warfare capabilities have corrupted our communication networks so thoroughly that we cannot coordinate a galaxy-wide response. The chamber erupted in harmonic chaos as representatives realized the scope of their situation. Centuries of galactic dominance, millennia of technological superiority, all rendered irrelevant by a species they had casually eliminated from existence. "Negotiation options," suggested someone from the diplomatic corps, their voice carrying the desperate hope of those who had never faced an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with. But Quilendra's scales shifted to patterns of absolute certainty. "There will be no negotiation. I attempted to suggest peaceful resolution during our encounter. Commodore Reeves made it clear that humanity's definition of justice requires the complete destruction of the Convergence's power structure." The words hung in the chamber's atmosphere like a death sentence. The species that governed the galaxy, that had maintained peace through overwhelming force for millennia, was facing an enemy that possessed superior technology and absolutely no interest in mercy. "Evacuation protocols," whispered Malix, their ancient consciousness processing possibilities that younger species couldn't grasp. "If the humans cannot be stopped, cannot be negotiated with, then survival requires abandoning our traditional power centers and retreating to regions of space they consider strategically irrelevant." But even as evacuation plans began forming in the minds of various representatives, new reports were arriving from across the galaxy. Human ships were appearing at convergence facilities with systematic precision, their attacks designed not just to destroy, but to terrify. They left survivors to spread word of their capabilities. They corrupted communication networks to ensure that descriptions of their weapons would be shared across every civilized world. Most disturbing of all, The humans were demonstrating an understanding of galactic psychology that suggested they had spent decades studying their enemies. Each attack was carefully calibrated to the specific fears and weaknesses of different species. The arachnoids faced weapons that dismantled their biomechanical technology at the molecular level. The energy-based ethereals encountered fields that disrupted their quantum coherence. The warrior Nexri found themselves facing combat systems that anticipated their tactics with supernatural precision. "They know us," realized Vordak, their electromagnetic fields pulsing with patterns of existential dread. 55 years of isolation, and they have learned to understand our psychology, our technology, our weaknesses better than we understand them ourselves. The session continued through several rotational cycles as the assembled representatives grappled with their new reality. The galaxy they had ruled for millennia was under assault by a species that possessed every advantage: superior technology, perfect intelligence, absolute motivation, and most dangerous of all, unlimited time to perfect their revenge. As reports continued arriving of human strikes across dozens of systems, one fact became undeniably clear. The Convergence was not facing a rebellion or a territorial war. They were experiencing the systematic dismantling of their civilization by a species that had been forged in the fires of genocide and emerged as something far more dangerous than anything they had originally feared. The humans had returned, and they were no longer interested in finding their place in the galactic order. They had come to replace it entirely. 2 years after the first human ships emerged from quantum space, like vengeful ghosts, the galaxy had been transformed beyond recognition. What had once been the Galactic Convergence's ordered empire now existed as a patchwork of devastated systems, refugee populations, and isolated worlds that had surrendered before experiencing humanity's definition of justice. Commodore Kalen Reeves, now bearing the rank of High Admiral of the Terran Hegemony, stood in the observation deck of the Retribution, humanity's flagship that had been constructed from the ashes of a dozen Convergence battleships. Before him, the red giant star of the former Convergence capital system burned with the fury of stellar manipulation, its surface temperature artificially elevated by human technology that treated stars themselves as weapons. The planet that had once housed the crystalline chambers where humanity's extinction had been declared was gone, not destroyed, but relocated to a neighboring system where it now served as a monument to the price of underestimating human determination. The beings who had once governed the galaxy from its gleaming spires now lived as refugees in their own empire, learning what it meant to exist at the mercy of a species that had no interest in mercy. "Final resistance reports," announced Director Isar Volkov, her neural interfaces flickering with data streams that painted the galaxy's new reality. Of humanity's original 9,812 survivors, fewer than 8,000 remained, a devastating loss for their tiny population. But each fallen human had claimed a price measured in entire star systems. "The Nexri warrior clans have officially surrendered," she reported, reviewing intelligence that would have seemed impossible just years ago. Fleet Marshal Corvain personally delivered their unconditional capitulation to our embassy on Kepler 438. They're requesting assignment to auxiliary peacekeeping roles under human oversight. The irony was bitter and perfect. The species that had served as the Convergence's military arm now sought to serve the power that had replaced them, understanding that survival required adaptation to the galaxy's new reality. Those who had attempted to fight humanity's return had learned that resistance was not just futile, it was actively counterproductive, resulting in escalated responses that made their original fate seem merciful by comparison. "Integration protocols remain on schedule," added Dr. Lyrachen, reviewing psychological profiles that track the galaxy's adaptation to human dominance. Species that surrendered voluntarily are being incorporated into hegemony administrative structures. Those that require convincing are being relocated to monitoring zones for observation and rehabilitation. The psychological conditioning that had sustained humanity through 55 years of hibernation and 2 years of warfare was finally beginning to evolve. The pure rage that had driven their return was transforming into something more complex, a recognition that destruction alone could not rebuild what they had lost. The galaxy needed order, and humanity had discovered they possessed an unexpected talent for providing it. Fleet Admiral Nix Voss approached with reports that demonstrated the scope of their transformation. Orbital construction is proceeding ahead of schedule across 47 systems. New manufacturing centers are producing civilian technology at rates that exceed pre-war convergence capabilities. Population centers that welcome human administration are reporting quality-of-life improvements that their previous governments never achieved. The technology that had been weaponized for humanity's return was now being adapted for peaceful purposes. Zero-point energy systems that had powered planet-cracking weapons now provided clean, unlimited power to worlds across the galaxy. Quantum manipulation technology that had deleted convergence fleets from reality now enabled faster-than-light transportation that connected distant civilizations in ways that had never been possible. But perhaps the most profound changes were visible in humanity itself. The survivors who had awakened from hibernation as living weapons were slowly remembering how to be human. Children, actual human children, were being born in the sterile environments of military ships and orbital platforms. The species that had faced extinction was not just surviving, but growing, their population expanding for the first time in over half a century. "Observer status report," requested Reeves, though he already knew what the answer would be. Quilendra, now bearing the rank of cultural integration specialist in the Terran hegemony, approached with scales that shifted the patterns of complicated contentment. Her species had been among the first to recognize the new galactic reality and had prospered under human administration in ways their previous membership in Convergence had never allowed. Galaxy-wide integration, proceeding within acceptable parameters, she reported, her harmonic frequencies carrying undertones of genuine respect for humanity's governing capabilities. Species autonomy is being maintained within hegemony guidelines. Cultural development is being encouraged rather than suppressed. Economic productivity is approaching pre-war levels despite extensive infrastructure damage. The humans, it turned out, were remarkably effective administrators. Where the Convergence had maintained order through overwhelming force and rigid hierarchy, the hegemony encouraged innovation, cultural diversity, and economic growth within a framework that prioritized individual species' needs. It was a governmental system that reflected humanity's own chaotic development, messy, adaptable, and surprisingly effective. "Memorial status?" asked Reeves, his voice carrying the weight of 8 billion unquiet dead. The memorial had become humanity's most ambitious construction project, a ring of quantum generators orbiting Earth that projected holographic images of every human who had died during the bombardment. 8 billion faces floating in space above the world they had called home, each one a reminder of the price of underestimating human determination. The project would take decades to complete, but it served as both monument and warning to any species that might consider challenging humanity's new position. As the years passed, the galaxy was learning that humanity's return had brought more than just superior firepower. It had introduced concepts of justice, individual rights, and technological progress that most civilizations had never imagined. The species that had been eliminated for growing too quickly was now shepherding the development of civilizations across thousands of worlds, encouraging the same rapid advancement that had originally marked them for destruction. But in the quiet moments between administrative duties and diplomatic meetings, the survivors still carried the weight of their unique history. They were the last humans who remembered Earth before bombardment, the final witnesses to a civilization that had died in nuclear fire. Their children would inherit a galaxy that bowed to human authority, but they would never know the small blue world where humanity had first reached for the stars. Standing before the memorial projectors, watching the faces of the dead flicker in orbital space, Reeves finally allowed himself to feel something other than rage. The galaxy was safe, human authority was unquestioned, and the species that had casually ordered their extinction had learned that some crimes carried consequences that spanned generations. Humanity had returned from the dead, and in doing so, they had become something new. Not just conquerors or administrators, but gardeners of galactic civilization. They were nurturing the same rapid growth and technological advancement that had originally marked them for elimination, but now they were applied across thousands of species and millions of worlds. The Convergence had declared humanity extinct because they feared what the species might become. In trying to prevent that future, they had created something far more profound, a galaxy where human values of innovation, justice, and determination shaped the development of every civilization that reached for the stars. Earth still turned silently in its orbit, But it was no longer alone. The memorial lights of 8 billion dead illuminated a galaxy that would remember forever the price of underestimating humanity's capacity for survival, growth, and ultimately, forgiveness tempered by an unshakable determination never to be victims again. The humans had returned, and the universe would never be the same.